And hi there, Garth Greenwell.
Hi, Andrea.
How are you doing in Iowa?
Doing okay in Iowa City. Lucky to be with my partner in our house, and yeah, we're sort of hanging in.
And so far, no mad fights or stomping off into the other room.
Not yet. I feel like we approach that precipice, but also we're both writers, so we're really good at giving each other space.
Oh, that's good. So you were made for this.
Yeah, right. I mean, we are pretty accustomed to isolation, but of course, it's entirely different when it's no longer a choice.
Oh, right. Yeah, we all want our choices. Um, so you are going to be one of the brave souls leading a virtual Lit Fest fiction class. What do you think of that? How's it striking you right now?
Um, I mean, I feel pretty excited for it. I'm teaching this semester at the Iowa Writers Workshop, and we have also moved all of our classes to Zoom. So I'm hoping that by June, I'll sort of have figured out the ins and outs of workshopping by Zoom. But so far, the experience has been pretty seamless, and it actually does give a pretty good sense of being in a room with a group of people with a shared purpose.
Wonderful, wonderful. And we've been talking to a bunch of writers, just asking them to throw us a line during this time. And I know you're gonna share a poem and even talk about one of your own works. But before I let you do that, I'm gonna read from one of my favorite books. Maybe you know of it.
That's so
Cleanness
nice.
by Garth Greenwell. And I was feeling nostalgic for people gathering together. So I went back to Decent People and Cleanness, and there's just massive protests going on and gathering everywhere. It was like a gathering binge and people just touching each other just heedlessly, like in the old days, like it used
Like
to
in the old days, a month ago, yeah.
and I wanted to read this one section where he's teaching a classroom full of kids, and they've been reading Whitman. So I'm just going to read this one short section that kind of threw me a line during all of this, and then we'll turn it over to you. Does that sound fair?
That sounds great. Thank you.
Okay. So he's in front of the class, and there's been some discussion about how much poetry or anything helps anybody, right? What does it really do? Poetry, I exclaimed, sitting up straight in my chair, which had the effect I wanted. They all turned to me, silent, less obedient than bewildered. I looked at them a moment, a kind of caesura, and then I repeated it, poetry, as though it were the obvious answer to a question, the answer they already knew. That's what poets can do, I said. Poets and artists, they give us ideas to buy into, for whole countries to buy into. Like Whitman, I said, whom they'd all studied. They've been reading Song of Myself. Think of what he wants to do in that poem, I said, and when the country was at war with itself, absolutely broken, he wants to make an image of America anyone can buy into. Like that miraculous section, and I used that word, miraculous. I was getting excited. I was getting swept up in Whitman, as I always did. That section where all he does is name things, I said. Well, not things, people. It's just a list. He wants to include everyone. He wants to find a place for everyone. An equal place, I went on, though I was talking too much now, and a place in his affection too. There are those wonderful moments he puts in parentheses like a whisper. Do you remember where he tells us he loves the person he's just named? That's what he thought democracy was, I said. A poem that named things and made an occasion for you to love them. He wanted to stitch America up, I said. He wanted to break all the divisions down. Yes. Read it, everyone. And now I'm going to turn it over to Garth, and thank you for this book.
Thank you so much. That was so kind. Well, I thought I might also read a very short passage from Cleanness, something that I've been missing a lot in these days of isolation is just the experience of going to museums and getting to sort of experience art face to face, not just through a screen. And so I thought I would read a short section from the central chapter of Cleanness, which is called The Frog King. And all you need to know is that the narrator is with a man he loves and with whom he's having a kind of a new kind of relationship for him, a romantic relationship that is unprecedented in his life. And it's Christmas vacation, and they take a budget trip to Italy, and they're in Bologna. And they go to visit a museum that isn't named, but it's the Morandi Museum. There was so much to see, too much. I walked around in a daze of looking. We moved in and out of churches crowded with paintings, huge and smoke darkened, the ceilings crammed with color. I got tired of trying to see them. R was full of zeal. He wanted to see everything. Who knows when we'll be back, he said. The dilemma of vacations, the exhaustion of the last chance. Everything became unremarkable. Nothing moved me. It was all a blur of perfection. I wanted to get the bus back to the hotel. I wanted to rest my eyes. But just one more thing, R said, paging through the guidebook we had bought. And he led me to a small museum, a house converted after the artist who had lived in it had died. There were just a few rooms open and uncluttered, the walls painted mercifully white. It wouldn't take long for R to make his circuit. I followed him, barely looking at the paintings, which were small and unremarkable, or remarkable only for their plainness. They were quiet and unambitious, minor, I thought at first, still lifes and modest landscapes, interesting mostly for having so little to do with everything else we had seen. The painter had spent his whole life in this city, but seemed indifferent to the examples it offered, to the virtuosity and gorgeousness it prized. I found myself looking longer, looking more slowly. I let R walk on ahead. The same objects appeared again and again, household objects, plates and bowls, not filled with flowers or fruit, but empty, set against a plain background. I stopped in front of one that showed a pitcher and cups, white and gray on a tan surface, behind them a blue wall. Something held me there, looking. Something made me lean in to look more closely. The cups were mismatched in color and in shape. The pitcher rose oddly elongated behind them. The whole painting was eccentric, asymmetrical. There was a kind of presence in the painting, I felt. I could sense it humming at a frequency I wanted to tune myself to catch. I liked the seeming naivety of it, the way the simple figures had been simplified further, purified or idealized to geometrical forms almost, but rendered bluntly, imperfectly. And the brushstrokes were imperfect too, visible, haphazard, the paint distributed unevenly, inexpertly. But that wasn't right. Really, it was striving for something ideal. That was what I felt, the frequency I wanted to catch. What I took at first for blocks of color dissolved when I leaned in, were modulated, textured, full of movement somehow, not the movement of objects, but of light, which fell across them gently, undramatically. But that's not right either. It didn't fall across them. There weren't any shadows. I couldn't locate the light at all or tell if the scene depicted morning or noon. It was as if the objects emanated their own light, which didn't move from one quadrant of the painting to another as real light would, but vibrated somehow, giving a sense of movement and stillness at once. There was a promise in it, I felt. I mean, a promise for me, a claim about what life could be. And then the second thing I thought I might read is a poem, not by me. But I've been finding myself spending a lot of time or being drawn to the poetry of James Merrill, who's a poet I love. And in some ways, he seems like an odd choice. I mean, there's not an obvious relevance to the particular moment, but the poems give me such comfort. And I don't know, I think in part it's because of, I mean, they do that thing that art can do, which is, to frame a little bit of reality that so often seems to be meaningless or random, a sort of, assortment of facts and happenings in which nothing really matters. And art can put a frame around a piece of that, and then within that frame, everything matters, every choice, every decision. And there's something very comforting about that. This is a poem from Merrill's last book of poems, which is called A Scattering of Salts. And it's called Rescue. And it's about saving a turtle. This couple is on vacation, and the speaker's partner swerves off the road and jumps out of the car and saves a turtle. And one of the reasons I love it is that the poem ends in the voice of the turtle, which I think is really just a magical choice. Also, I haven't fact-checked this, but the poem gains a certain poignancy for me because I imagine that perhaps Merrill wrote it in the period when he knew he was dying of AIDS. Certainly he wrote it in a period when, as a gay man, that loomed as a possibility for everyone. But the poems that Merrill wrote at the end of his life from the experience of dying of AIDS are extraordinary. They're written with this extraordinary grace and sense of defiance, but also of reconciliation. So I read this poem in that light, although I don't know what year it was written in. I don't know if it was written in that knowledge, but the poem is called Rescue. Dusk. Rain over, but asphalt hissing, flooded clear with sea light. Sharply, sweetheart, you swerved, pulled off, ran back, and snatching the 3-inch turtle we almost hadn't missed as it started its perilous crossing, deposited it there at the far pasture's edge. Mission so nimbly, raptly accomplished, where dizzying beams rushed both ways and tears broke from the tall trees, that I, who saw the marvel, simply filed it away for future use. We'd seen so many marvels those days. Water welling from a mountaintop, the fire goddess faithfully bleeding into the sea, our helicopter's crawling shadow a fly on folds of charcoal lame. From higher yet, eye to eye with the ever grander rising sun, the full moon setting. Our own 2 bodies, burnished by foam, and rainbows appearing in pairs, the showy male, his mate shyer like a Japanese bride and groom, peaceably browsing on the jacaranda grove in palest purple bloom. Back to the turtle. Here's a tale it can tell till the end of time. Night was falling. Too frightened to shrink into my shell, as the shattering lights hurtled past, I took despairingly slow steps to appease them. Upon Chelonian powers that shouldered Terra herself, from a waste of waters childlike I called for help. Was heard, only then turning to instinctive stone. Shame upon me. I had shut myself to life, even as it uplifted and heaved me into a green haven. So those are my texts for Corona isolation.
Oh my gosh, thank you for that. That decadent trip through the museum. The turtles.
The turtles are so great. I love the poem so much.
Oh, now I do too. And I want to remind everybody, Garth's books, we're going to have links to the tattered cover. Garth, we're sending you and your family all the love and safety and good health in the world. And we're really, really grateful for this and looking forward to seeing you this summer.
Thanks so much. All the best to you guys. Looking forward as well.
Oh, great. Okay.